in New Vrindavan. And this was all well known to many ISKCON leaders. It was well known to Radhanath and all the other Mumapati and all the other big people at New Vrindavan. They now say they didn't know about any of this, but it was going on so commonly. There were hundreds of examples of this. How could they not know? So they knew. They knew, and they supported, and they encouraged that, and they tried to cover it up. And they helped Kirtananda in this whole enterprise, which we called the marriage-breaking program. They would break up a marriage and then use the wife as a sort of a ticket that they could give to someone else who was loyal. Here's a wife. We're going to give you somebody. You can have sex with this woman now because she's loyal to the Guru, Kirtananda. Her husband was not loyal, so we got rid of him, and now she's free to be with our loyal person. And some women were, just handed around to 4 or 5 or 6 men. They were just married, supposedly, by Kirtananda, and very little of this was done legally. Kirtananda would just say, your marriage is no longer valid, and he would just have people exchange flower garlands, and then they would be married in this way. But anyway, to make a long story short, Sulochan, after having his children kidnapped at gunpoint, he called me up and he says, Pranjan, you are right. These guys are totally bogus, they're unauthorized, they're criminals. I'm going to come out to California, we're going to expose them, I'm going to help you. Let's do it. Let's get them, and you and me are going to work together. So Sulochan made his way towards California. On the way here, he stopped in Los Angeles, and he bribed some people there to get Prabhupada's letters. So Prabhupada's letters were being suppressed. They were not being shown to the devotees. So Sulochan got the letters, and he got the so-called appointment tape. The gurus had said they had been appointed on a tape, but nobody had seen or heard this tape. So Sulochan also got a copy of this tape, and then he came to Berkeley, where we began to analyze the letters and the so-called appointment tape. And not too surprisingly, we found out that Prabhupada had not appointed any gurus. And not too surprisingly, we found out in the letters that Prabhupada had very little confidence in these so-called leaders, and there's no indication that he thought that they were pure devotees and gurus and all the rest of it. So then Sulochan and me were at this hotel where he was staying, the Flamingo Hotel in Berkeley. And the phone rang, and it was Rameshwar. And Rameshwar said, Sulochan, you better return these letters and the tapes and everything else you got, or you're dead meat on the hook. So Sulochan put the phone down, and he says, Rameshwar just threatened to kill me. And so we both just started laughing, and we said, wow, we must be really onto something. If they're going to kill us for having Prabhupada's words here, then, that means there's something in these words that they don't want to have made public. So we're onto something. And so we became even more convinced that we, had a mission to bring Prabhupada's words out to the mass of devotees, because now it became very clear that the leaders were trying to suppress the words of Prabhupada. So one of the interesting things we found right away, there were many letters that Prabhupada wrote saying there's no such thing as divorce in ISKCON. And yet Satsvarup was orchestrating divorces, he was breaking up marriages, Rameshwar was breaking up marriages, Kirtananda was breaking up marriages, Bhagavan was breaking up marriages, Hare Krishna was breaking up marriages. So we said, well, for starters, they're not following one of the basic instructions of Prabhupada. Prabhupada says, we don't want divorce in our society, and these guys are making an epidemic of divorces. So this is how the ISKCON leaders orchestrated the child molesting, because it was all connected to the divorces. If there were so many divorces going on, the children were put into an unstable situation where it was harder for the parents to monitor the children. So the child molesting was going on more easily in a situation where where the family structure was in a state of constant turmoil and breakdown. So we think there was a systematic plan by the leaders to break down the members of the society into a sort of chaotic situation, so then they could exploit the woman and exploit the children, which is what was going on. So Sulochan was writing about this, and of course this is how the leaders were getting their supporters. They were getting these sentimental women, and they were getting lusty men who wanted these sentimental women. This was the core group of the followers of the leaders. So they were creating this exploitation situation and this was creating their following. And so Srilochan was saying this following is being created by exploitation, and so naturally he was not very popular with leaders. In other words, Srilochan began to identify certain patterns within the leaders of ISKCON and explain by using quotes from Prabhupada was actually demoniac, at least according to Prabhupada. Breaking down the family, and of course worshipping homosexuals as messiahs. All these things came out openly saying the leaders of ISKCON are demoniac individuals. So he was really challenging them to the core of their system. In other words, Srilochan began to identify the behavior of the ISKCON leaders as demoniac, evil, and so on and so forth. So he was really targeting himself in their crosshairs because they, naturally are going to react to someone who's just saying they're demons and who's exposing their behavior and who's collating and organizing and putting together a comprehensive, detailed analysis of how their behaviors are demoniac. So this was coming to a head more and more. Meanwhile, Srilochan was talking to the committee that was supposed to be in charge of justice. They had some kind of a ISKCON Justice Committee. Mukunda Swami was one of the members of that committee. I think Rabindranath Swarup, a few other people. So Srilochan called them up and he said, hey, there's demoniac activity going on. My wife has been kidnapped and my children have been taken away from me. What are you guys going to do about it? And of course, there is no justice. They still have the same Justice Committee, by the way. This committee is now monitoring Satsvarup, a guru who's having sex with the wife of a follower, and they just put him under the monitoring committee. Actually, nothing ever really gets done. So then Srilochan said the monitoring committee is also demoniac because they're making pretend that they're fixing the demoniac activities of the bogus gurus, and it's just a way of covering up the crimes of the bogus gurus all the more. So me and Srilochan discussed that, and we kind of compared that to the medieval system of apologists for the Vatican. The apologists would write, they were professionally trained writers who would make all kinds of rationalizations for the bad behavior of the Pope or the Church. People would write in to complain, and the professional apologists would write some kind of a letter telling people, don't worry, you're a victim, but, if you keep your mouth shut, you'll go back to heaven. So the ISKCON false gurus were very much like the falsely appointed popes. They were the appointed gurus, and now they had their own professional team of apologists, people like Rabindranath Swarup, Mukunda Swami, Umapati, Jayadvaita. These kinds of people were making up excuses for the bad behavior of the bogus gurus. So there was a small number of dissenters, not many of us, and amongst the dissenters, very few of us were writing publicly that the leaders of ISKCON are demons and this type of thing, although it was very evident that criminality was overtaking ISKCON, and in fact the situation was demoniac. So we all kind of knew that, but not many people were actually bold enough to, state the obvious, that what was really going on was ISKCON was turning into a demoniac society. And Srilochan very clearly expressed that in his writings. There's no doubt when you read his writing that the situation in ISKCON was in fact becoming a hellish demoniac society. Wives were being taken away from their husbands, marriages were being broken up,